Escalating tensions with Iran. President Trump calling out Iran's president after the leader said U.S. policies toward the country could lead to the, quote, mother of all wars with Iran. In a tweet last night, the president wrote to Iranian President Rouhani, never, ever threaten the United States again, or you will suffer consequences, the likes of which few throughout history have ever suffered before. We are no longer a country that will stand for your demented words of violence and death. Be cautious. All caps. This coming as the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, is calling out Iran's religious leaders and addressed plans to reimpose economic sanctions.
The Ayatollahs are in on the act, too. Judging by their vast wealth, they seem more concerned with riches than religion. These hypocritical holy men have devised all kinds of crooked schemes to become some of the wealthiest men on earth while their people suffer. Right now, the United States is undertaking a diplomatic and financial pressure campaign to cut off the funds that the regime uses to enrich itself and support death and destruction.
Joining us is the editorial director for the Washington Examiner, Hugo Gordon. Hugo, your take on this?
You know, President Trump is reminding the Iranians that things don't go well when those countries threaten the United States. Your viewers probably remember that Saddam Hussein promised the mother of all battles against the United States, but he was crying uncle after 3 weeks of the Gulf War, and he was dead after the second. What you're really hearing here is the fact that the Iranians are feeling the strain of the end of the deal that President Obama put in place. The United States, Israel, and some Arab countries are really putting pressure on Iran to undermine it throughout the region, and the pips have started to squeak.
Do you think that we get a new deal? Because, again, new sanctions will go into place. I think it starts next month. There's the issue about Europe, but paltry few American companies really stepped up to begin doing business in a significant way in Iran after that nuclear deal from President Obama, because it was not ratified as a treaty, and they assumed that the next president, because it could be a Republican, would pull out of it, and sure enough, that's what happened.
Right. Well, American companies did not, but the European countries certainly have. But, you know, the European countries are going to have to make the calculation. Do they want to do business with the Iranian economy, or do they want to do business with the much bigger American economy? It's hardly a choice at all. They are going to have to adjust. They're going to have to start scaling back and ending business. And, of course, there's the question of oil exports. It's that could mean as much as $1 trillion of losses or lost revenue to the Iranians over the course of the next 10 years. This is a really serious problem for the Iranians. The mullahs are losing support from the country. The country is fed up with their theocracy. And as I say, you know, the allies, the United States, Israel, and countries like Saudi Arabia are increasing pressure to try and undermine the Iranian regime.
Hugo, Mitch Rochelle, and Dagan made reference to it in terms of whether or not there's a new deal. If there was some sort of new deal, what would the foundation of that deal be? Obviously, it would be much different than the deal in the past, but is there sort of a rubric or a framework for what a deal would look like?
It seems to me that, I mean, this obviously is to some extent speculation at this point. It doesn't seem to me that there's a deal that can be done with the Iranians, you know, in the way that the Obama administration did. I mean, the last thing that this administration wants to do is to cement the Iranian regime in place. I don't know that there's any deal that could be done which was acceptable to this country and acceptable to Iran. I mean, that's something we're going to have to read about and see.
I was going to, just to clarify, Hugo, I said the first sanctions are set to take place next month. It's actually on August the 4th. So it's coming up shortly, followed by the measures that will target Iranian oil. That begins to happen on November 4th. That's why it's so critical that the United States has a growing oil supply, that we're increasingly energy independent or heading toward that. We're the biggest exporter in the world of refined petroleum product. And that gives us an incredible amount of leverage over someone like Russia and its partner in crime, Iran.
Exactly so. The United States became the biggest energy producer, I think, more than a year ago. It's now the biggest oil producer as well. It's overtaking Saudi Arabia. This gives it leverage all over the world. For example, President Trump in Europe just a week or so ago pressing Germany on the gas pipeline from Russia, putting pressure on them to buy energy from the United States. The United States has a much greater ability than it has ever had to control the price of oil, and that's the way it can really squeeze the Iranians.
Well, then there was also the report that we were going to give some of our allies in Europe a pass on purchasing oil from Iran. Is that still on the table? Because I've heard stories both ways.
Yeah, I've heard stories both ways too. You know, it's also been said that no, the November deadline is a deadline, and the Europeans are going to have to fall into line. And the closer we get to that deadline, the more likely it is that the Europeans are going to have to scramble to get themselves in position. They don't want to lose business. They don't want to have any sanctions that prevent their access to the American market. The Iranian market is much, much smaller.
And all of this surely will be discussed with Jean-Claude Juncker, the president of the European Commission, who's visiting the White House on Wednesday of this week, because in recent months, Europe has been talking about exploring activating accounts for the Iranian central bank to basically keep this agreement alive. So there's much to discuss in terms of Iran in Europe. Hugo, thank you for being here. It was great to see you as always. Hugo Gordon.